Freelancers, small business owners, consultants, and solopreneurs. Some people are just drawn to working for themselves. I'm Owen Roth. In this show, I have conversations with self-employed folks about their career journeys. Welcome to the Bossless Path podcast. And here we go. Today I'm joined by Kiko Denzer, a man who's going to do a better job of self-describing than I can describe concisely here myself. Kiko, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Can you tell us what you do?
I do different things almost every day. Lately, I've been in production on the lathe. I make bowls and wooden wares out of wood. So that's been the main focus. But today I have some helpers who are working in the garden. So we're clearing the fig trees out and mowing and doing a whole bunch of garden stuff. And then pretty much, every day I have to check email and correspond and do all that stuff. This time of year, the woodwork is the primary activity. So I'm hoping for some holiday sales, but mostly I'm getting ready for winter market and then also events in the summer where I take inventory and sell stuff.
You also teach
I also
as well.
teach, yep. And I have a little publishing company. I self-published a couple books and then published a couple of books that my mom wrote and one that a friend wrote. And then I realized I didn't really want to run a publishing company. So I haven't pursued that. That's a full-time occupation. And I'm not really looking for a way to tie myself to the desk.
When you say you have a publishing house, is that what you'd call it?
An imprint.
Imprint, okay.
Yes.
That you have the physical equipment to do it?
No, I mean, I have a computer.
Oh, okay.
Anybody with a computer, all you need now is a phone. You can publish stuff. It's, all you have to do is, you don't even need to generate PDFs. It can all be virtual. People are, publishing on Kindle and doing.
Yeah. Screen stuff.
Everybody's a publisher now.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted clarity if it was like you're actually physically, you got a printing. I don't know if it's called printing press anymore,
no,
but
that's now called letterpress.
Letterpress, okay.
Right? So, I mean, if you're doing physical printing, you're probably not running, large-scale industrial presses that print thousands of copies. Although, actually, now with the print on demand, those are just those are computers. I mean, it's like a copy machine, and those will print books.
Yeah.
So if you've got the money, you could have one of those too. And you're a photographer, right? You have a printer for printing your images?
I do. It's a medium format printer, so it's
right.
Tops out at like 13 by 19 inches.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah.
That's a big print.
Usually the prints I sell are larger, multiple feet large, and those I outsource because
those are very large.
Yeah.
I'm used to 5x7 and 8x10. I'm old school. I did photography when it was 8x10.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's funny how like it scales so much now, but it seems like anything, whether it's printing like written publications or photos, it doesn't in this day and age, it makes much more sense to outsource that side of things than to do it physically do it yourself.
Unless you're doing art books and, it's all handmade.
Sure.
People are doing that. And I was going to bring you one. I do print little booklets that are a single sheet of 8.5 by 11 folded over and then stapled and cut to make a little 16-page booklet.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I know you did bring some woodwork stuff.
Just because if I need to get my hands going while I'm talking, I'll carve a spoon.
Gotcha. Yeah. I remember.
And leave chips on your floor.
That's all right. I probably need to vacuum up anyways. Yeah. But when we spoke on the phone prior to this interview, you said you were whittling a spoon as we were talking. So you do a lot of things.
Right.
Does it go seasonally throughout the calendar year, or is it like more of life seasonally as far as what you do?
Well, both. In the past few years, there has been sort of a pattern because I've been trying to focus on the woodwork. Mm-hmm. So, having production for holiday season and then doing winter market has been, a focus and a way to organize the year. And then, I usually teach in the spring and summer, and I have events I go to that are regular. So that's been a bit of a regular schedule. And then I fit things in elsewhere. And then this past year, I've been involved with a group of colleagues to start a folk school. So that's been a whole other sort of endeavor.
That's the
Tarweed Folk School.
Tarweed Folk School.
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk a little bit about what that
Yeah, well,
is?
that could be a long old conversation, but folk schools started in Denmark in the 1850s and were instrumental in helping Denmark make a transition from sort of aristocratic society to a more democratic society. And they were schools that welcomed people into a cultural setting where the focus was not on performance and grades and a set curriculum, but was really on helping people to define their own needs and questions. And the schools, it being Denmark, it being that period of time, there were cultural activities that helped bind people together. And Denmark was concerned as a small Scandinavian country, right? Hemmed in by lots of other countries.
Yeah.
They were concerned about sort of maintaining their culture. So singing and working together and local crafts were a big part of the activity that helped to sort of bind people together and shape the school. So, and the idea, so the guy who started the idea was a minister, and he never started a school. He just talked up the idea, and then other people picked it up, and they did all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
And they were ideologically diverse, and the various curricula were diverse, but the idea of sort of peer-defined education, popular education, really took hold and made a huge difference in the development of the country. And then that idea was adopted and, traveled to different places. And in America, it landed in the Appalachians. And because Appalachian culture was really strong on craft became a primary focus for those folk schools. But my introduction to folk schools was through the Highlander Center in Tennessee, which was an incubator for the civil rights movement. And there, the idea was more focused on gathering people to talk about whatever problems and issues they had in their community and try to come together to come up with solutions and strategies. So what we're doing with Tarweed is primarily focused on craft, but it's also focused on, making space for people to get together, learn something, but also work together as neighbors and have space to talk. We don't have space in this culture anymore readily for people of diverse backgrounds to just get together and work together and do things together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the theoretical background. And then last summer, being our first year, we organized 35 classes, 29 of them filled. We had a lot of people come out. We partnered with Greenbelt Land Trust and a couple other folks locally. So that was the site where we held classes, and we'd have 3 or 4 classes at a time. So people got to see what other people were doing, and it was cool. So I helped, organize the effort, and then also taught some classes.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's in its infancy, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. First year, and now we're trying to figure out how we do follow-up. Yeah.
Sure. Is that partnership with the Greenbelt Land Trust going to continue in
yes.
that setting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And, one of the things, I taught a class on mowing with a scythe, right?
Okay.
Like
yeah.
the Grim Reaper has.
Yeah.
Yep.
Big scythe. Yeah.
Yep. And it's a super effective tool. It's really handy in the garden. And for the kind of work that Greenbelt is doing, it has a lot of attraction. So we did a little sort of demo and teaching session with a volunteer group that comes in once a month to help them do land management. And we're hoping to do more next spring. And that's just the kind of thing I want to do with the folk school, right? Is get people involved in taking care of their place. I don't have the tagline for Tarweed memorized, but it's basically about tending the land and tending the community, right? How do we do that? It's something, you can't do it by yourself. You have to work with your neighbors. So anyway, that's the idea.
Have you ever heard of the book Switched Off?
No.
No? Okay. I read that years ago, so my memory's going to be a little bit fuzzy here. It's nonfiction. It's a guy and his wife, or maybe she becomes his wife throughout the process, but it's sort of his memoirs and story of he goes from, more traditional life like we live, maybe I live, compared between the two of us, But he lived in some big metro area. It might have been Philadelphia again. It's fuzzy. It's just off the top of my head here. But he moves to, I believe it was a Mennonite or maybe it was Amish. It was some culture that didn't use machines. And he moved there and he started just integrating into that society and trying to do it kind of as a life experiment. And he ended up, and the book's well written and it's just really interesting to hear his story. And he found a lot of what you're talking about, like plugging into the community and living this life without machines and electricity, and how like the community was like something he just didn't quite have any thing that equated to in his old life, where there's just like, there's barn raising that they did. And like, there's just a lot of
reciprocity.
Thank you. Yes. Between neighbors, out of necessity.
Right.
I think what happened with his story was he lived there with his wife longer than expected. And then he ended up deciding he did want to go back to, it wasn't for him indefinitely, but it outlasted his like expected, life experiment of, I think it was a year.
Right.
And then he did go back to a city, but it did inform his life and he lived a much more, I don't know, for lack of a better term, grounded life going forward. I can't remember what he ended up doing as of the finishing of the book in the last chapter. But anyways, it just comes to mind as you're mentioning all this.
Yeah,
It's
I'll
really
look that one up. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Amish and the Mennonites said, that's a whole interesting community.
Mm-hmm.
And they're far more considerate of their choices than we are. They're not early adapters of anything and take a long time to figure out not only whether or not it fits, but what the potential impact on the community is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Partly as a result, at least from my understanding, they're incredibly successful. Like my folks lived in Minnesota and had Amish or Mennonite neighbors. And because everything they grew was organic and because they didn't go into debt to buy equipment, they were often the more prosperous farmers in the area because they weren't working so damn hard.
Yeah.
And one of I forget where I read this, some exchange between, a conventional farmer and an Amish or Mennonite farmer. And, the guy's crowing about how his machinery, it's got, headlights so he can farm at night. And the Amish guy says, yeah, I'd rather go home and have dinner with my family than work all night.
Sure.
They're, different set of values, right?
And that informs everything in their life. I don't know you very well, but it sounds like you've always lived this way,
this way.
sorry. That's very, I'm applying a label here that I shouldn't. You've been very conscious of like the life that you've developed. Is that correct? Or?
Well, I was thinking about it. The number of years I've actually worked for somebody else or had a boss are very few. So I've mostly been self-employed.
Mm-hmm.
The decisions I've made with regard to employment have mostly been in pursuit of, knowledge or experience or freedom, really.
Yeah.
The kind of knowledge and the kind of experience that I've been pursuing has changed because I started out on the East Coast and, went to college there and had one sort of set of assumptions and expectations and did a lot of community development and housing and working with food co-ops and publishing and running a little community newspaper and various side jobs that I took on for people or, did as consulting jobs. But then when I moved out west, the context changed radically. I ended up in a very rural area and sort of by chance ended up living out in the boonies where I could grow food and walk in the woods and collect mushrooms and go hunting with my neighbors. And, it was just a completely different set of circumstances and a completely different context. So my, the kinds of knowledge that I wanted to pursue at that point shifted sort of drastically. It's like, how do I grow a garden?
Yeah.
What's this about? How, what's the best, what are the best crops to grow for, not just the place that I'm in, but also the, feeding myself.
So that decision though, to relocate,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like that wasn't a conscious decision you made for gaining those experience and knowledge?
The decision to move to the boonies was serendipitous. I'd been working a community development job, which I got soon after arrival in Oregon from the East Coast, and it was what I was qualified for professionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for a couple of years, and then I was the only person on the team who actually had experience in community development. Everybody else was sort of in from a social work background.
Okay.
And we were doing drug and alcohol abuse development, but we were working under a federal grant that was based on research that basically showed, lo and behold, if the community is healthy and has healthy things to do, they do less drugs and alcohol.
Go figure.
Yeah, go figure. So I kind of pursued that angle, and you can't really pursue that angle and do things like Just Say No parades and, anti-drug information, because people drink and they smoke and they do all that stuff, right? So
yeah, it's flashback to the DARE campaign that I grew up with. Yeah,
yeah, which and the research shows that the DARE campaigns really didn't do much except educate kids about drugs. Right?
I've heard that. Yep.
So, so it was kind of an oddball deal, and I ended up in conflict with my superiors. But by the same token, I got involved with a rural community in East Lincoln County that was losing a federal campground to the Clinton Forest Plan because the funding had been cut, the rate of harvest had been cut, and there weren't funds to support things, and they were looking for anything they could cut out of their budget.
Uh-huh.
And the community came to me at one point and said, we have a neighbor who lives in the house and is the caretaker for the campground. The house is going to go away. They're going to be homeless. But the pit toilets were going to go. The little houses were going to go. And actually they did go. And one of the neighbors said, now there's little piles of toilet paper all over the place because people are out there pooping in the woods, which is what you do when you go camping, right? And there's no pit toilet.
Yeah.
So anyway, in my previous work, I had helped convert publicly subsidized housing developments into cooperatives. And I'd done some other projects that involved, communities taking responsibility for their local landscape. So
yeah,
I ended up working with that community to negotiate a permit with the Forest Service that allowed them to run the campground as a nonprofit. So they set up a nonprofit organization and basically contracted with the Forest Service to run the campground. The campground sold them everything that didn't have roots for $1, right? So they got the house and they got the structures back for the pit toilets.
Yeah.
And they've been running the campground for 30 years.
Wow.
Right. So that experience sort of gave me some connections in the community. And then when I quit my job and I decided to go back to art, I was living in Corvallis and my housing fell through and I didn't have a place to stay. And one of my friends from out in Harlan said, we have an old cabin on the place. You could fix it up and live there. So it was like, I was a city kid.
Yeah.
Right? And this was a little tar paper shack out in the boonies. And,
sink or swim.
Well, not only that, but it was a complete, if you grow up in the city, you live in a house, right? And
Sure.
you go from the house to another building or you get into your car and you don't really live in a neighborhood. Right? You don't live in a world that's defined by trees and creeks. You live in a building. And this little tar paper shack was this god-awful, ugly building with flies crawling around under the tar paper on the inside. And it was like, oh, God, I'm going to live here. And, I didn't see the land around me. But
yeah,
moving out there, my life expanded to occupy the space outside of the house. And that was a complete reset.
Wow. Yeah. As you're saying this, for some reason, I'm just like rewinded in my mind as a kid reading Winnie the Pooh, just seeing like the map of like, was it 100 Acre Woods or something like that?
Yeah.
And seeing that map of like all the like outdoor areas that Christopher Robin explores and all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when I was considering it, I was talking to a friend because I was scared. I didn't know, it was like, God, I'm going to move out here and live in this tiny little shack. And my friend said, didn't you ever read My Side of the Mountain? Didn't you ever think about,
Oh, yeah, that's
self-sufficient out in the woods? And I was like, oh, yeah, I did. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I thought, well, I'll try it, see what happens. And it was a shift that pushed me in a direction I'd been wanting to go in, but it was a door I didn't know how to, I couldn't identify by myself. And it just popped up in front of me, and then I walked through it. And what I found on the other side was what I'd been looking for.
Okay. Going through the door, was that
Mhm.
a painful process, like the learning of how to adapt?
I mean, once I got out there, I'd never had neighbors who, I mean, we had a fire out there, and half a dozen, 8 neighbors showed up, and we put
A
out.
wildfire, not like a bonfire that you did.
No, a house fire.
Oh,
The
wow.
woodshed.
Yeah.
I think it was a battery, a storage battery for a little solar panel that blew up, or a mouse got into, or something. But
Yeah.
my wife and I woke up in the middle of the night when a propane bottle exploded. And actually, I would have slept through it. My wife woke up, and a bunch of neighbors, showed up, and we put the fire out with a bucket brigade.
Yeah.
The Fish and Wildlife guys showed up, and they were there to protect the woods, right? They're not allowed to touch house fires, but if the house fire lights up the woods, they need to shut the fire down before it torches the whole landscape.
Sure.
But they got out of their truck and said, geez, that's the first time we've seen anybody put out a fire with the bucket brigade.
Yeah.
So having neighbors like that was huge. And people stop and talk to each other on the road. It was just that first hump. It was saying yes, right, to something that I didn't know. That was the only hard part.
And then once you're through that door, it was comfortable, and
Yeah.
that's what you enjoyed.
Yep.
Yeah, as far as lifestyle.
The other funny thing that happened out there is that, I was single. I was in my late 30s, and, wondering if I was ever going to find anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But, so there's loneliness to deal with. But I would get in the car to go to town a couple times a week for shopping and swimming and, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was out there, I was content. But coming into town, I'd get to one intersection, and there was like a switch in my brain, and all of a sudden I would start thinking, oh, I want this, I want that. Why don't I have, what everybody else has?
Huh.
And just recognizing that switch, it was a moment of awareness, but it was also a moment of recognition of the power of whatever you want to call them, societal norms that don't necessarily have anything to do with reality.
Yeah.
Right? I heard this quote just the other day. Reality is what's left after you give up all your beliefs.
Huh.
Right?
Yeah.
And
yeah. Interesting.
we come from nature. We don't come from cities. We don't come from this kind of life with all this stuff and all these digital devices and all these desires for stuff that we don't need.
Yeah. So what happened in your life after that? I guess
after that switch,
I should say, it sounds like that informed like your thoughts then, and I assume that informed the way you lived your life.
When I quit my last day job, I thought I was going to make a living by sculpture. I thought I was going to be an artist, and then I ended up. My neighbor was teaching anthropology at OSU, and she had a guest lecturer coming who she told me was living on $3,000 a year in a house he built himself for $500. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be an artist, that would be a good skill to have.
Yeah.
So I went to see the lecture, which was amazing because he had worked all over the world. And what he did was show pictures and share stories about people who lived in much closer relationship to the land and in much closer relationship to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And he was teaching workshops on earthen building, right? Build a house for $500 out of mud.
Yeah.
So I took a week-long workshop, and as a result of that, I found myself in building wood-fired ovens, and because I baked bread, and a wood-fired oven is the best way to bake bread,
Mm-hmm.
or makes the best bread. They strike a chord with people, right? It connects people not only to food, but also in a lot of cases to traditions and cultures, right, that are older than McDonald's and KFC.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're made out of mud, you can sculpt them into anything. So, you can make whimsical creatures, or you just make a beautiful round oven, and they're very attractive.
Yeah.
So people got excited about them, and I found myself teaching workshops on how to build mud ovens, and then I found myself doing residencies as a teaching artist in schools, working with kids, doing community art projects. And
Very cool.
that fit me pretty well because I'd had the background in community development, which was a real passion and a real desire. But the process of building practical, beautiful things with people that shaped and improved their environments was huge. So, it was sort of a domino effect where things started happening, and again, the context changed, and I found myself in a community of artists, craftspeople, builders who were able to be creative in ways that are much more, I think, powerful and significant than, just building stick houses to code, right? Because the code is a cookie cutter. It says you build this way.
Yeah.
And, they all look the same.
Yeah.
That launched a couple of different activities that have made my life possible. The teaching brought in an income and connected me to community. I ended up writing a little book about how to build an earthen oven, and it hit there was like a triple market for that book because there was artisan bread, there was natural building, and there was sort of the garden boom. And the book took off and supported me and my family for 20 years.
Wow.
And then it also reframed my whole understanding of art as an activity, as a kind of work. Because prior to that, I grew up with an artist mom, and, she struggled and taught to make ends meet, but always struggled with the modern paradigm of, a successful artist who basically has to make stuff and sell it to people. And you become a salesperson. And a lot of it is ego driven. And it's also, it's part of the plutonomy, right? It's the economy created by rich people. I mean, Sotheby's sells Picassos for millions of dollars, right? And that's what you aim for as an artist, is for your name to become valuable. And people invest, right? So you're a speculative commodity. It just didn't make any sense to me as a kid.
Yeah.
But I didn't see any alternatives to it. And, when you build an oven as a community with a group of people, everybody's involved in design or can be involved in design. Everybody can be easily involved in construction. And then the process not only creates something beautiful that everybody has a hand in making, but it also becomes a part of a communal story. So it becomes a focus for building culture. And focus and fire come from the same root, right?
Yeah.
In Italian, fire is fuoco. So, the kitchen and where we eat, that's always the center of human life. It always has been. So it completely shifted my ideas about art and what it meant to live by art instead of trying to become a commodity, right? Which is what an artist has to become in order to, succeed in the art market. And I don't want to dismiss that altogether because it's, part of the reality we live in. But
Sure.
I feel like it's, I can't believe that, the sort of image of the starving and sort of psychotic or, psychologically compromised person or artist isn't in part the result of this kind of isolation that happens when you put that very human activity into a very small commercial box. So, and I don't know what your experience is as a photographer, but
Yeah.
you got to sell pictures, right?
It's kind of interesting you bring that up. So I haven't been doing this full time for very long, only a little over a year at the time of speaking. But it was interesting when I made that transition in the college years when I was getting into photography and had been doing it for a little while as a hobby. And I'm just like, do I want to make this a profession? I don't know. And I dabbled with that. I had some reality checks, specifically working for someone briefly who was a photographer, to like see what it meant to try and do it and be self-employed. And the interesting thing that's being brought to the front of my mind now, you bringing up the commodity side of it, is there's a point when I did decide I'm going to at least try to make some money out of this and not purely have it as a hobby. And I was selling, like, well, I'll sell prints because at the time I was really into landscape photography. And I started to sell prints, not with a crazy amount of success. No surprise. I think there's a lot of us out there, photographers trying to do that, and just landscape painters probably too, in all the mediums. The interesting thing I found was once I had it in my mind that I was going to try and generate some type of income, or at least pay for the hobby itself with print selling, that informed the type of photos I was taking.
Right.
And then I just woke up, like whatever it was, a year later, and I'm just like, wait, I've totally skewed. I used to just like, being out like on my hikes and backpacking, and I would be in great places and I would take landscape photos of the imagery that like I saw naturally. And then once I started to sell prints, or try to sell prints and occasionally sell one, then I realized, people were going to want to, at the time I was living in my hometown, down in Chico, California. And, people want to see iconic local things.
Right.
They want to see the local swimming hole. They want to see like the iconic building. It's a college town like Corvallis. And I started taking photos of that purely so I could have high quality photos to sell as prints. And then I had that wake up moment, kind of like you did when you went back into town after living in the country. And I was just like, there wasn't a specific moment like you're talking about at the intersection that you had, but I did have a moment like, wait, what have I been taking photos of for the past year? It was this, the frog that slowly boils in hot water and doesn't really realize it. I just noticed, I'm like, I don't enjoy the type of photos I'm taking, and I'm not even making money at it. This whole pursuit of like making some money in photography has totally skewed the way I actually do this, what was a hobby and on paper still is a hobby, in this pursuit of trying to generate some type of income. So that was kind of a strange period. And ever since that, I've been a little bit more intentional, with ups and downs, of course, about like what I'm trying to pursue in terms of my creative craft, photography, and now video as well. But I'm human, so I'm always like having moments like that where I'm like, oh wait, why did I got kind of carried away? But that one really sticks in my mind as a very bold period of my time where I realized I was actually I looked back, because at the end of every year, I copyright all my images that I've published or licensed or have potential to license. So I'll see all the photographs I have taken in that calendar year at the end of the year. And I remember just scanning through them, just like, I've taken very few actual landscapes that I enjoy taking. Oh, here's one of 1 Mile, which is an iconic location. Here's a few of the university. And I'm just like, what happened?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It was kind of a weird period of realization. It's hard because you finding that balance of how you want to live your life,
Right.
what you want to do, how you'll support yourself, your family, if you have one.
Right.
I mean, it's still something I struggle with even to this day, and I probably will for ages.
Well, it's the struggle we're all in, right? I mean, the market and the economy they set the terms, right, for our engagement with each other and with the world, and money and monetary value are the primary measures for almost everything. And it's reached a crisis, and I think, when you hit that crisis, you have to make some decisions, right? You have to figure out what measures you actually want to live by.
Yeah, that's one that I do remind myself of quite frequently, just being mindful of, like, I guess, practicing what I might preach, even if it's internal preaching. One thing that frustrates me, to explain it better, is when people talk about being more environmentally conscious, being more green and what have you, but they don't really accept that the reality that they're going to live in by choice, because they still want to have a car and live in a modern society. And I don't blame them, because I do too, and I'd live there because it's great. Like, in many ways, it's comfortable. A lot of people don't really have that, like, oh, I'll buy a Tesla, and that's like, someone said this to me recently when I was visiting my family, like someone I've known for a long time. They said they take two a small family, take 2 cars to events, but it's fine because they're both Teslas. And I'm just like, what?
Right.
Okay. But there's a lot that goes into that Tesla, the infrastructure that supports it.
Oh
And it's
God,
like,
yeah.
anyways, I'm kind of rambling here, but basically I feel like there's a really strong disconnect. We want to like justify our lives and decisions. We want to have our cake and eat it too. And I'm pretty cognizant, I mean, look right here, you and me are sitting and I've got $12,000 of digital equipment sitting around us, recording us. And it would be so disingenuous for me to say like I'm doing everything I can
Right.
to, because I'm not. I'm absolutely not.
Right. Right. Well, we have to live with our contradictions and paradoxes.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's interesting, I mean, just the fact that you're doing this podcast and the phenomenon of podcasts is a whole thing unto itself. And if nothing else, you and I are having a conversation, right, about important things.
Sure.
And I'm 64 and I grew up reading books and, consuming a certain amount of media, but I'm just sort of astonished. I have to work to listen to podcasts because they don't fit very well into my normal routine. But so many, especially younger people, seem to spend so much time listening to podcasts. And it's partly reflective of what kind of work people do because they're doing things that don't require their full attention so they can listen to a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But by the same token, there are some amazing conversations out there. Whether or not anybody's making a living off them is a whole other question.
I think some people are. I don't think I'm going to make a living off of this.
Well,
and that's
but that's another topic is what the media industry has done to the income possibilities for publishing. I mean, this is a form of publishing, right? You're making this conversation public.
Sure.
Right? That's the meaning of to publish, is to make things public. But I think it's good at least that people are talking to each other. And there are people who are on podcasts who are, I think, helping people to formulate different kinds of understandings. And I think, people are definitely looking for other options. And certainly being independent of the systems and the machinery of current industry has huge appeal for a lot of people. And if this is a mechanism for people to step out of the rat race and get off the hamster wheel, then, maybe that's helpful. This is sort of random. I pick up books on, I read something or I come across a website and then I get the book. So I just got this from the library, but it's called A Simpler Way. And it says there's a simpler way to organize human endeavor. Right? Isn't this what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
It requires a new way of being in the world. It requires being in the world without fear, being in the world with play and creativity, seeking after what's possible, being willing to learn and to be surprised. It requires a belief that the world is inherently orderly. The world seeks organization, and it doesn't need humans to organize it.
True.
Anyway, I haven't read the whole book, but it's like, I feel like, I don't know, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about being self-employed. Right? It's being free. You can work for money, which is, also speaks to ego and speaks to status and all those things. You can work for people, mm-hmm. which is service, and you can work for freedom or beauty, right? Which can also be service. And those options aren't out there in the career development classes that kids get at.
Yeah.
High school or college, and they're not out there, in the want ads, if there even are such things anymore.
Probably not printed. Yeah.
Probably not. Definitely not printed.
Yeah.
So we need to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, you're touching on the impetus for me doing this podcast. One of the main things was just like, oh yeah, it's great to hear other people's stories because it's what we do as humans, right? We often model behavior after other humans, for better and for worse. In contemporary Western culture, in America specifically, there's a lot of modeling of the traditional career path, or at least there was. I think that is shifting with the digital age. the thing about self-employment is it's hard to put in a formulaic box and present that to someone young and
But
say,
that's the point. It's not a
"Whoa,
box.
that is
right?
the irony,
You
right?"
need to,
Yeah.
creativity requires freedom, and
Sure.
you need to be able to you need to be free to make unusual choices and to make unusual connections. And, post COVID, I've now come across a number of young people who are, realizing that they don't have to do college the regular way. So one young person I've been who's been helping out on some of the stuff I've been working on basically was in a program where she could do her coursework distance learning, and then she spent the rest of her time working on farms because she wanted to be in the world doing something real.
Yeah.
Right. And then she fulfilled her academic requirements on her own time. I had another kid working for me last fall who was basically doing the same thing at OSU, but he organized his full course load schedule in such a way that he could complete his requirements, do his in-person classes as needed, and still give me 20 hours a week to basically be an apprentice and learn about what I do. So super smart. And he saved money, right? Because in return for his help, I gave him a place to live and fed him. So he came out ahead.
Yeah.
Super smart.
Yeah, in almost every regard. He's
right.
Doing it more affordably and gaining skills.
Yeah.
And mentorship. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think and it doesn't fit in a box. You have to take what you're interested in, what you're good at, what you have passion for or energy for, and what's around you, and see how it fits together.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I always tell both myself and other people who ask, is, you gotta do what's right for you. You got to find your own path and your own formula. Right. And like what's right for you, Kiko's, might be different than what's right for me. There might be some overlap.
Right.
And that's the cool part about doing self-employment of some capacity, is that you have room to play.
Right.
I think it can be scary though for some people. And I don't think personally it's the right fit for everyone.
No.
I think some people are just like, you know what, if you like more structure and security, then it's probably not for you.
Right.
But having conversations like this one with you, I think is great to like share with other people what the possibilities are. Right. Even if it's just opening someone's mind to being like, oh, I could do that, or a variation of that, is as close as you can come to modeling a life as on the flip side, you can model what a life would be like in a traditional career, of employment, because that one's easy to demonstrate. Yeah. That's what we're taught in school.
Right. But those don't, I think those went out the window when I was in school because, employers stopped doing lifetime employment.
Right.
Decades ago.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't, and the recent thing post-COVID is like, people realized, I'm going to do that for that amount of money. No, I'm not. I'd rather not. So,
right. Yeah.
I think that's a hopeful sign. People refusing to get into the hamster cage.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. I mean, that's human evolution, right? There's always revolutions and reforms of way of thinking, whether it's
they get better at building hamster cages and making traps, but
that too. But human society isn't like necessarily linear, in the way it progresses. It and not everything within it moves in the same direction.
Right.
Like, cultural revolutions will happen within periods of time. I mean, you can just look at our country's short history, and overall you can look at it, if you're just looking at it through a certain lens, like maybe a consumption lens, yes, more and more consumption. But if you're looking at it,
progress.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, that's subjective.
No, it's not subjective. It's very clear that consumption is what's going to end it.
Oh,
Right?
yes. Sorry. I meant like the
Limits.
definition of progress being subjective.
Well, that's a whole nother interesting conversation. I think progress is a cultural trope that we've come to accept as being necessary, but progress, right, for the bulk of human history, progress has not been a thing. Human society has been cyclical, right? It's a cycle of birth, growth, and death, and then rebirth, growth, and death. And the cyclical nature of things, it's only with Western culture that we've come up with this idea that progress has, or that culture has an end point, right? And that the end point is what? Human domination of everything, or going to Mars and doing it all over again on another planet after we've completely destroyed this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to challenge that notion.
Yeah. I definitely can relate to that in many ways. Well, saying it out loud and thinking of the hypocrisy in my life that I mentioned earlier. But I think this is leading to something that would be a much longer discussion than the hour or so that we have here. So maybe this is a time to pivot before we suck up the rest of our evening. What do you have in mind for the future? Do you not even think in terms of like what you'll be doing next?
Well, I'm not ambitious, but there's stuff I want to do. It's funny, ambition comes from the Latin word ambulare, which means to walk. Because if you wanted to get elected in Greece, in ancient Greece, you wandered around, you walked around the marketplace to talk to people and bump into them so that you could schmooze and connect and garner votes, right?
Okay.
So it was all about sort of social presentation. But anyway, yeah, there's stuff I want to do. I'd like to see the folk school succeed. I'm hoping to find people to work with to make useful objects, tools, and wares out of local materials that will meet local needs. I'm seeing more and more people interested in mowing without gas engines, for instance. If you're going to do that, you need a wooden handle for your blade. You need a rake to rake up the grass or blackberries or whatever. Bowls and spoons and cooking utensils. I make stools. And I'd like, there's more stuff to make than I have
Time.
hours
I'm sure.
to make.
Yeah.
So finding a way to do that work with other people is definitely on the docket. And then I live on an acre, and I'm talking to people about joining me on that acre to help share the work of making it productive. So there's a bunch of fruit trees, there's garden space. And again, it's more work than I can do by myself. So,
but you've mentioned you have people who have helped you or have helping you.
Right now I'm flush with help, which is great. And things, I had to, at post-divorce, I had to reorganize everything and, do a bunch of renovation. And so there's been a lot of preparatory work. So now that's finally done, sort of, I have room to move forward. And, the other piece is working with the community. And again, the purpose of the folk school is to make space for people to come together in ways that frees them to make choices, to strengthen themselves, to strengthen the community, and to hopefully to build our connection to the landscape that we live in. And I think people talk about localizing. And I think that's super important. If you don't know your neighbors, right, and you can't, then it makes it hard to work together. And if you can't work with your neighbors, then your ability to localize is going to be
pretty
severely
limited,
constrained. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot in store for the near and distant future. Yeah, I know you'll be busy. I know that.
I won't get bored.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So what words of advice would you have for someone who's considering a path of self-employment of some capacity?
You have to follow the New Hampshire license plate. Live free or die. No, I think the greatest skill I learned from my mom was creative ways to live cheap.
Yeah.
Because if your needs are few, then you're much freer to do what you want to do, and that's been really important. And it's not what you're encouraged to do by the educational system or by the employment system, right? You're encouraged to earn more and to buy more.
Yep.
And if you earn less and buy less, then you have more freedom and more time. I think that's essential.
Yeah.
And trust your own experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you say, everybody's different. You got to figure yourself out. The other thing I was reading recently that struck me as being germane to this conversation is that the hardest thing you're ever going to do is figure yourself out. And
Very true.
if you don't make that a priority, then you can't really ever be free.
Yeah. I work on that every week. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a lifelong
Ongoing
process.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, how can people find you or get in touch with you if they're interested in seeing the things you're doing?
I have a website. It's handprintpress.com. And I am reluctantly on Instagram at Kiko Denzer. And I have stopped posting the past few months, and I'm not really interested in getting back on, but I do check for messages and, to keep track of some other folks.
Sure. Yeah. Speaking of hamster wheels that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Social media and Instagram.
Right. Making money for Zuckerberg is not what I want to spend my time doing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll share that in the show notes so people can reach out to you and at least get in touch with you if they're interested in hearing about the stuff like the Tarweed School and all that stuff. So,
cool.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time and the conversation. It's been really interesting.
Yeah. Thanks. It's a pleasure. And good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. And there you have it. This has been a really fun conversation with Kiko. Definitely getting into the metaphorical life stuff, which is always really fun stuff to talk about, especially in the realm of subject of self-employment. So if you want to hear other conversations that are similar but not the same as this one, definitely subscribe and listen to the podcast. Until then, this has been the Bossless Path. Catch you next time.